Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and we've done white, we've done blue, so it's time for the black set review for Magic Origins. Just a very quick reminder, this is a limited set review only. I'm talking about draft and sealed. I'm not talking about standard, legacy, modern, etc. My grades do not reflect cards' playability in those formats. I haven't played with these cards, I haven't proxied them up, I haven't tested them, so unless they're reprints that I've played with already, I don't know these cards. I haven't played with them. This is sort of my first glance, my first impression of these cards. And finally, of course, this is just simply my opinions. You may have different opinions, and I certainly want to hear them. If you think I have grossly overgraded a card or undergraded a card, let me know. I love having discussions about these cards, and I think set reviews should never be taken as the gospel truth. I think set reviews should be taken as a jumping off point for discussing cards, for understanding why you're wrong about a card, why a card that you think is good is actually bad, and why I'm wrong. Why did I think this card was bad when it actually is good? So definitely keep all of those disclaimers in mind, but we're going to jump right on into the set review. First up, we have Blight Caster. Blight Caster is a 3 and a black creature human wizard at uncommon, and it's a 2/3. 2/3 for 4. It says, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may have target creature get -2/-2 until end of turn. I don't think this is going to have a big enough impact on Limited to really do much of anything. There are a lot of enchantments in this set. And a lot of them, as we saw yesterday with the blue enchantments especially, are bad. There's some okay ones. You know, there's the removal type ones like suppression bonds and claustrophobia. But there's just a lot of bad global enchantments. Things like Jace's Sanctum and what was the other one? Sphinx's something? Sphinx's Tutelage. And some in black that we'll see. Just there's a lot of bad enchantments. I think the Enchantment Matters deck is a trap, is a solid trap. So ultimately, I think this is basically an expensive 2/3. If you have some decent enchantment removal, if you're blue-black and you have a bunch of claustrophobias, if you have Weight of the Underworlds that we'll talk about at the end of this review, then maybe this could be playable. So I'll give it like a C-, but I think I generally want to avoid Blight Caster. I think it is a trap. Next up, we have Catacomb Slug. This is a 4 and a black creature slug, and it's a 2/6 vanilla. Nothing else on this card other than flavor text, and this is a reprint. It was in, I'm going to say Gatecrash, because the flavor text says Wojek, which was a Boros thing, I believe. Yeah, this just isn't a card you want to play. It's a 2/6 for 5. That's a lot of mana to put into something that is basically just going to be a blocker. There's no deck that wants this at 5 mana. If this was 2, then maybe a grindy deck would want to side this in against aggro, but there's no reason to play this card ever. Solid F. Next up, we have Consecrated by Blood. This is a 2 black enchantment aura at uncommon, and it says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has flying, and, quote, sacrifice 2 other creatures, regenerate this creature. So it gains that text on its card. So this has the aura problem, as usual. It pumps up your creature and then makes your creature a target. Now you can regenerate your creature, so that kind of negates the aura problem of getting 2 for 1. But in order to regenerate this, you have to sacrifice 2 creatures, and that seems like a massive cost to me in Limited. Unless there's a huge, super wide token strategy, and you're going to have just dozens of creatures to throw away, sacking 2 creatures just to regenerate 1 seems really bad to me. So realistically, I feel like this is +2/+2 for 4, which doesn't do much for me at all. So I've got to give this an F as well. Next up, we have Cruel Revival. This is a 4 and a black instant at uncommon, and it says, destroy target non-zombie creature. It can't be regenerated. Return up to 1 target zombie card from your graveyard to your hand. So this should be pretty solid removal for the set. There's not that many zombies kicking around, and of course if you're up against a white-blue deck or a... Actually, there are a couple of blue zombies. Let's take that back. But there's just not a huge number of super relevant zombies, so this should be generally unconditional removal. It's not cheap. It's not Doomblade, but we don't get Doomblade anymore unless it's called Ultimate Price, which we did get. But this is the new age of removal. This is what removal costs these days. 5 mana. You know, we've been paying that for Reach of Shadows and being fairly okay with that. If it gets you a zombie back, cool, but that doesn't really... It's not needed for me. It's not required to me that you get that value off of it. It's like Foul Tongue Invocation. It's not required that I gain the life off of it. I just want to kill the creature or have them sacrifice the creature. So I'm going to give this a B-. I mean, it's not 100% premium removal because it will miss, you know, if they have a Scab Goliath sitting on their battlefield. But otherwise, I think it's pretty solid. So B- for me. Next up, we have Dark Dabbling. This is a 2 and a black instant at common, and it says regenerate target creature. Draw a card. Spell Mastery. If there are 2 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, also regenerate each other creature you control. Quick rules warning note here. Be careful, there is a blow-up potential. If the creature that this is targeting is made illegal, it is given protection from black, it is given shroud, it dies, etc., the entire card fizzles, so you don't draw the card, and probably very importantly, you don't regenerate your entire team. So if you made blocks based on this card going off, there is the potential for this card to just be hard countered from any color. It doesn't have to be blue. So just be careful with that. It probably won't come up too much, but just beware. Overall, I don't really like the card. Butcher's Glee is good. Necrobite's decent, but that's because it regenerated in addition to something. A power boost plus lifelink or death touch being granted. This is just regenerate. It replaces itself, but you know, I don't want to play a card that just says draw a card. I mean, actually, that wouldn't be awful if it was costed appropriately. But yeah, this just feels like a waste of a card to me. I don't really want this. Even if I get to sometimes regenerate my entire team, I still just don't think it's very good. I'll give it a D. Maybe it'll have some sideboard potential, but that's about it. Next up, we have Dark Petition. This is a 3 black sorcery at rare. And it says, search your library for a card, then put that card into your hand, then shuffle your library. So it's a tutor. Spell Mastery. If there are 2 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, add black to your mana pool. So it's a tutor with Dark Ritual tacked on if you have Spell Mastery, meaning that ultimately this costs 2. You do have to have the double black in order to cast this in the first place, but it'll cost you 2. It'll be Demonic Tutor. And Demonic Tutor is a good card. It's basically a Demonic Tutor that says you can't cast this until turn 5 or later. Tutors are pretty powerful. They lose some power limited because your decks typically aren't as toolboxy as tutors like decks to be. This one does feel a little bit hard for me to judge, though. I think I need to see, and I've said this before, I need to see how regularly Spell Mastery will be on, because I'm not sure if it's a sure thing or not. I'm very cautious on it. You know, whether you have Spell Mastery or not, this is a late game card, because even if you have Spell Mastery, you still need 5 mana to cast this. Even though it will ultimately cost 2, you still have to have 5 up front. It just changes whether you can do some extra stuff, whether you can maybe cast the card that you tutored for. That would be cool. It just feels really hard for me to judge. Tutors are generally decent enough in limited because you can go and get your bomb if you haven't gotten it already. I don't know where to put this card, really. I'm going to go with a B-, and I'm not sure if that's too optimistic or not optimistic enough, to be honest. But I'll put it at a B- for now. and we'll see how much it'll drop. I don't know that it's something that I'd want to take first pick, ultimately. But I'm going to have to see where this one really shakes out. This is probably the one card in black and maybe the set that I'm just really unsure about. Next up, we have Deadbridge Shaman. This is a 2 and a black creature elf shaman at common. And she says, when Deadbridge Shaman dies, target opponent discards a card. So it's a 3-1 for 3, which is fine. I do like my 3-1s to cost 2, generally. But she has the ability tacked on, so the threat of your opponent having to discard a card may make them not block for a couple of turns until they use up all their good stuff or draw an extra land that they can throw away or an extra whatever. Ultimately, this probably just falls into the filler category. It's cuttable or not cuttable as you see fit, I would think, which is a solid C for me. Next up, we have Demonic Pact. This is a 2 black enchantment at Mythic. And this says, and it's a fun one, at the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Demonic Pact deals 4 damage to target creature or player, and you gain 4 life. Awesome. Can kill a creature, can hit my opponent, I get life back. Awesome. Target opponent discards 2 cards. Mind Rot. Okay, cool. It's not the best, but it's totally useful and in the right situation, potentially really useful. Or draw 2 cards. Divination. I love Divination. Or you lose the game. I don't like that one. That's probably not the right choice most of the time. Now, of course, if this has been around for 4 turns, you lose the game is going to be the only one that you have left to pick, unfortunately. You know, just don't. Just don't. I know it's awesome. I know it's super flavorful and it's really cool. And yes, you could do some shenanigans where you could bounce this on the 3rd turn that it was out and reset it and get more value out of it. There's all kinds of cute interactions going on here, but ultimately, don't. I think it's just an F through and through. You'll pick it because it's fun and cool, and maybe it'll be valuable. Who knows? But in a competitive stance, just don't. Next up, we have Despoiler of Souls. Despoiler of Souls is a black creature horror at rare, and it says Despoiler of Souls can't block. It's a 3-1, by the way. Despoiler of Souls can't block. 3-1 can't block. Also, you can pay black and exile 2 other creature cards from your graveyard to return Despoiler of Souls from your graveyard to the battlefield. So here's a 3-1 for 2. I just said I like to pay 2 for my 3-1s. I prefer to pay one of those as colorless mana, not colored, but all right. It's okay. It feels like this would be good if you're really aggressive, but it also feels like it'll fall off in the late game. You're going to need to have a lot of creatures die to fuel this being brought back, which isn't a spot that you want to plan on being in. In an average game of Magic, some creatures die. Not a ton, and not none. But just a medium number die. If you're in a game where you're, having 6, 8 of your creatures dead, you're probably not in a good spot. In addition, late game a 3-1 just really falls off anyways. Anything can kill it. Maybe trade with it, but everything is going to kill this in some way or another. So yeah, I'm just really unsure about this one. The double black hurts it as well. The double black definitely hurts it. So I think ultimately I'm going to have to go with a C+ on this. I love 3-1s. I really love 3-1s. And this is a 3-1 that can be recurred. But I think the recur cost is just too much and too inconsistent. So I'm going to go with a C+ on it. Next up, we have Erebos' Titan. Erebos' Titan is a 1 black 5/5 creature giant at Mythic. And it says, as long as your opponents control no creatures, Erebos' Titan has indestructible. As well, whenever a creature card leaves an opponent's graveyard, you may discard a card. If you do, return Erebos' Titan from your graveyard to your hand. A 5/5 for 4 is a beating. Just a beating. But you're going to need to be heavy black, so keep that in mind. Of course, you're probably going to first pick this, and so you can clearly keep it in mind. The second ability, I don't feel like it's going to happen all that much in Limited. But if you do it, awesome. Good for you. You're going to have to require some very specific things to happen to get creatures out of your opponent's graveyard. Exiling them or bouncing them back to their hand, or they're going to have to be doing some recurring things. There's just some stuff going on here that I don't think is going to readily happen. In Constructed, there's things like Den Protector, where your opponent's going to play that and bring a creature back, and hey, you get to bring Erebos' Titan back. But in Limited, I just feel like it's really kind of clunky. That being said, it's a 5/5 for 4 that has Indestructible if your opponent's board is empty, which means they can't even top deck removal and kill this guy. So I am going to give it a pretty high grade. I am going to go with an A- on it. I think it's just a solid, bomby card. I think this will get some damage through. I think this will end a game. This is a card that needs to be answered. Really needs to be answered. So I'm going to give it an A-. I'm going to keep it out of A just because I do feel that that ability is clunky. I don't know that it's going to happen all that much. Next up, we have Iblade Assassin. Iblade Assassin is a 2 and a black creature elf assassin at common, and she's a 2/2. When Iblight Assassin enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Seems decent. It can kill X1s with ease. It can finish off a creature post-combat. There's just a multitude of uses for this. It's, I would say, a more useful Hooded Assassin that we've just recently had in Fate Reforged. It's underpowered if you're wasting the effect. It's a 2/2 for 3 that does nothing if you don't kill something with the -1/-1 ability. But it seems fine to me. Generally includable, I think. Not bomby, not flashy, not a high pick, but includable most of the time, I would say. So C+. Next up, we have Iblight Massacre. This is a 2 black sorcery at uncommon, and it says non-elf creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. So every not an elf gets -2/-2. This, I don't think, is awesome. It's Drown in Sorrow that costs 1 more because it doesn't hit elves. Drown in Sorrow is huge and Constructed because mid-range decks and control decks can use it against tokens. Decks tightly tuned to flood the board with creatures against decks tightly tuned to not have 2/2s and 1/1s. That doesn't happen in Limited. Limited is all about the curve. Limited is about having 1-drops and 4-drops and 3-drops and having 2/2s and 4/4s and etc. And so Drown in Sorrow and Iblight Massacre falls off a little bit in Limited. I don't think making it more expensive makes it more awesome just to make sure that you don't hit elves. Still, if you can engineer an asymmetrical board wipe, then bravo, good job. But I just don't know that elf tribal is going to be a huge thing in Limited. You can try, but I don't recommend it. That being said, I don't think the card's awful. I don't think the card's awful by any means. I just don't think it's very good, especially at sorcery speed. So I'm going to go with a C. I think it's just kind of a card that's there. I'm not going to go out of my way to pick it. I'm not going to go out of my way to play it. But it's there if I need it. Maybe even sideboard playable if you're up against a lot of, X1s and X2s. But yeah, C for me. Next up, we have Fetid Imp. This is a 1 and a black creature imp at common, and it's a 1/2. It has flying, and it also has an ability, Pay Black. Fetid Imp gains Death Touch until end of turn. I like this guy. I like this guy a lot. Mardu, what's his face from Cons? Mardu Hateblade. He was awesome. He was cheaper. He was a 1-drop, but he didn't fly. He didn't have 2 toughness. He was a 1/1. And you needed a different color from the color of the casting cost to activate him, to give him Death Touch. This, if you cast it, you can activate it because you had the black to cast it. You have the black to activate it. It flies, which means it knocks creatures out of the air. It does a really decent impression of typhoid rats with wings. And yeah, I think this is a really good card. I give it a B-. I'm going to take these relatively highly in black. I'm going to yeah, I'd be pretty happy taking this guy, pretty happy including him in all my black decks. I'll put in 2 of these guys. If I can get 3, I might even put in 3. We'll have to see. Really good in control decks that want to stop attacks from happening. So B- for me. All right, next up we have Flesh Bag Marauder. This is a 2 and a black creature zombie warrior at uncommon, and it's a 3/1. It says when Flesh Bag Marauder enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Sign me up. I love Edict creatures, especially high power ones that come down turn 3-ish. This I think is identical to Merciless Executioner, which we just had from the cons block. It was in Fate Reforged, I'm going to say. Yeah, I think it was in Fate Reforged. I'm pretty certain it was a 3-drop 3/1, and each player had to sack a creature. This is the same card, and still a good card. The only place that this loses some effectiveness is during a board stall, because of course then your opponent's going to have, 5 choices, and they're going to pick the 1/1 or the 2/2 instead of the 5/5. But these guys are pretty good, especially on turn 3. They can clear the way even sometimes and just start swinging in. Super happy with this card. I give it a B+. I'll take it pretty highly. Next up, we have Gilt Leaf Winnower. This is a 3 black creature elf warrior at rare for a 4/3. She has Menace. So Menace, I may not have talked about yet. Menace is the new name for the ability this creature can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. Normally cards would say that. Now they're just going to say Menace. So this can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. When Gilt Leaf Winnower enters the battlefield, you may destroy target non-elf creature whose power and toughness aren't equal, which is a very strange condition. I don't know if I've ever seen that before on a card. But that being said, there is a lot of asynchronous power-toughness combinations in this set. Just looking in black, I see a 2/3, a 2/6, a 3/1, a 3/1, another 3/1, a 4/3. 2 of the cards that we've reviewed so far today in black would not be killable by this creature. There's a lot of asynchronous power toughness, so it's a decent ability. Don't be too concerned about that. Don't think that's pretty narrow. And then, of course, once she blows something up, she's a 4/3 that has to be blocked by 2 or more creatures. I'm pretty happy with this card. I'm going to go pretty highly on it. I'm going to go with A- on it. I think it's going to be a solid card. It is a 5-drop, but boy, what a 5-drop. Next up, we have Gnarl Root Chaptrapper. This is a single black mana for a creature elf druid at uncommon, and it's a 1/1. And he says, tap, pay 1 life. Add green to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast an elf creature spell. Or tap, target attacking elf you control gains death touch until end of turn. I just don't see elf tribal being a thing. Not in limited anyways, maybe in constructed. Obviously, people love elves in other formats, elf ball and etc. But in this limited format, I don't really see elf tribal being a thing. So I don't think this guy does anything. I don't think he does much of anything. Maybe he'll do a teeny tiny bit of work, but ultimately this just seems like a trap, and I'm going to avoid this at all costs. F from me. Next up, we have Graveblade Marauder. This is a 2 and a black creature human warrior at rare for a 1/4. He has death touch. And he also says, whenever Graveblade Marauder deals combat damage to a player, that player loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So you know what I love on my 1/4s? Death touch. It'll block for days and devour whatever comes at it. The ability is a little bit odd. It requires this clearly defensive creature to be attacking. Because it does say combat damage. You can't even do something cute like throw a bow on this that shoots opponents and deals damage, because it has to be combat damage. And this guy's not an attacker. This is a defender through and through and through. It could just have defender on it. Yeah, kind of weird. The ability just doesn't really seem to fit for me. It'll certainly generate some extra damage throughout the game if you can, get in with it. And ultimately, I do like this card. I just don't think it's bomby or, you know, super awesome. I just think it's good. So I go with a B on it. Yeah, maybe not first pickable, but solid. So B from me. Next up, we have Infernal Scarring. This is a 1 and a black enchantment aura at common, and it says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+0 and has, when this creature dies, draw a card. So replacing itself is cool and all, and kind of gets around the, oh no, I got 2-for-1 problem, but it's still not going to make me play an aura like this. You know, you can still get 2-for-1 if they kill it, the creature as you cast this, and +2/+0 just isn't terribly exciting for me. Could be good on a flyer, but I'd just rather have another card in my deck than play this, so I'm going to go with like a D on it, I think. Next up, we have Infinite Obliteration. This is a 1 black sorcery at rare, and it says name a creature card. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name and exile them. Then that player shuffles his or her library. So you saw some awesome creature come down on their side of the board, and so you side this in, and in game 2 you name that creature and you go and get it and rip it out of their library or their hand or their graveyard or wherever it happened to be. Wherever it is, you're getting this card. That's still garbage. That's still awful. That's still not worth a card in your deck. Constructed only for me, because of course you want to, you know, grab all 4 copies of that in a constructed deck. You don't want to grab the single copy that's in your opponent's limited deck, because of course your opponent has to draw that card. They have to have enough land to play that card, and then they have to successfully play that card. There's a lot of steps down the path that they're going to have to take to play that card that you're naming. And you're spending 3 mana, you're spending a card just on getting that out of the realm of possibility. And the realm of possibility was already statistically a little bit low. So this card is just ultimately an F, as generally cards like this are. Surgical Extraction, Cranial Extraction, Slaughter Games, etc. Just solid F. Don't take this, don't play this. It's a trap. It's a pure trap. And when you kind of get your head wrapped around why this is bad, you'll have sort of a level up moment. Next up, we have Kothofed, is the way we're going to go with that. Soul Hoarder. This is a 4 black legendary creature demon at rare, and it has flying. It's a 6/6, so a 6/6 flyer for 6. Awesome. Sign me up right there. But it has more abilities. It also says whenever a permanent owned by another player is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and lose 1 life. I'll pay 1 life for 1 card any day. Any day. A 6/6 flyer for 6, awesome. I'm sold right there. Right then and there, I'm sold. Getting a card for everything that dies, and not only creatures. If I disenchant something somehow, I get a card. This just seems really, really, really good to me. Beware it's not a May. So if you're at 1 life and your opponent sacks a creature, you die. But beyond that, this card's just awesome. It needs to be answered really quickly. Total first pick. Solid A from me. Next up, we have Languish. Languish is a 2 black sorcery at rare, and it says all creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn. It's not quite a board wipe. It's not quite damnation, which everybody's sad about, but it'll do a fine impersonation of a board wipe, you know, like 90% of the time. Play smart, sandbag some stuff, hold some stuff back in your hand, convince your opponent to overcommit to the board, and then just blow them out. Just wipe their board and then start playing your own threats. This seems like a solid card to me. Total A, total first pick. All right, on to the Planeswalker, on to Liliana. On her original side, we have Liliana, Heretical Healer. She is a 1 black legendary creature, human cleric at Mythic. She has lifelink. She's a 2/3, by the way. She has lifelink, and she also says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile Liliana, Heretical Healer, then return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. If you do, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. So a 2-3 for 3 is fairly normal. A 2-3 lifelinker for 3 is totally fine. A fairly normal include in most decks. Not exciting, but fine. You know, Liliana Heretical Healer is a card that you would put in and you would be okay with that. But this is Liliana. She's a Planeswalker. She flips. Now, you probably don't have much control over when she flips. And that hurts her a little bit. You know, you're slightly at the mercy of your opponent to let her flip. They have to kill a creature. They have to attack in such a way that you can chump block or trade or whatever. Your opponent has some control over when she flips, unless you have a sack outlet, perhaps. But she flips, and she becomes Liliana Defiant Necromancer. This is a Planeswalker Liliana at Mythic with 3 loyalty to start. She has a +2 ability, the typical Liliana ability. Each player discards a card. You know, it's fine. It's obviously slightly better when you're out of your cards and your opponent isn't, but the ability's fine. We've seen it on Liliana of the Veil, and it is used to some pretty good use. Even if you have to discard, you can discard a creature, because her minus is a -X that says return target non-legendary creature with converted mana cost X from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's pretty decent. That is pretty decent. Graveyard to battlefield is a powerful effect. Especially repeatable as it is here on Liliana, as long as she's alive. Unfortunately, it's only your graveyard, not your opponent's, but big whoop. That's living in greed land. But you can still get back your bombs. You can still get back, even utility creatures to help defend Liliana. You can get back the creature that you discarded when you +2'd her. There's just a lot of utility coming out of this -X, and I really like the -X ability on her. Her ultimate is -8, and it says you get an emblem with whenever a creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So whenever anybody's creature dies, you get it at the end of the turn. That's really awesome. I doubt you'll ever want to kill Liliana for this emblem, because the creatures still have to die for you to get control of them. But if you have her at 9, I would go for this every single time. It's a pretty solid emblem that's going to give you some pretty serious inevitability, unless you're already in a massively bad spot. So ultimately, I think Liliana is pretty solid. Her creature side is perfectly fine, and she automatically protects herself by making that 2/2 zombie when she flips, plus potentially bringing back a 1 or 2 drop if you wanted to -X her right away. But I think she's pretty solid. Beyond the fact that you're going to first pick her anyways because she's a valuable planeswalker, I give her a solid A. Next up, we have some terrifying art, and it's a reprint, and everybody always considers this to be one of the more terrifying pieces of art in Magic's history. Macabre Waltz. This is a 1 and a black sorcery at common, and it says return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, then discard a card. I'm not usually a big fan of using cards just to get a creature back to my hand in limited. It always feels like a trap to me. People will say, it's a second copy of your bomb. It is, but you do have to draw your bomb and then play your bomb, and your bomb then has to die for this to be a second copy of your bomb. If all of that doesn't happen, then this is just a second copy of some random 2/2 or 3/3 or some random thing in your graveyard. Ultimately, I just don't think it's a terribly useful card. I think you can get away with playing it if you need to, but I think it's very, very cuttable, so C-. Next up, we have Malachy Cullblade. This is a 1 and a black creature vampire warrior at uncommon, and it's a 1/1. It's a 1/1 for 2. So it's got to do something good. It says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Malachy Cullblade. I like this effect usually, especially when it's nicely costed, and 1 black is nicely costed for me. It is a little bit fragile to start with. It's a 1/1. It's not going to be blocking. It's not going to be attacking probably. It's going to be dying to every burn spell ever made. So I expect it will die somewhat readily just because people will be afraid of it, which, hey, means your opponent wasted removal on a 1/1, and that's fine too. And if this does stick around and start getting counters, then it's going to start getting out of control. So I'm pretty happy with this guy. I'm going to go with a B-. I think he's an auto include in every black deck. Next up, we have another reprint, Nantocohusk. This is a 2 and a black creature zombie insect at common, and it's a 2/2, so 2/2 for 3. And it has the effect, sacrifice a creature. Nantocohusk gets +2/+2 until end of turn. 2/2 for 3 is okay-ish, but obviously off the vanilla test. But it has a very, very decent effect. Sack Outlet's always something I'm on the lookout for in a set, because it can get you value. It can get you value off of any leaves the battlefield effects. It can synergize with active treason or things like that. Having a Sack Outlet is always a good thing. Getting +2/+2 on the sacrifice is a good bonus too. I think this is going to be includable in a lot of decks, and even higher include if there is that synergy. If you do have some threaten effects, if you do have some leave the battlefield effects, anything like that, I think you want to include this guy even more. So I give him a C+. I think he's less cuttable than cuttable. Next up, we have Necromantic Summons. This is a 4 and a black sorcery at uncommon, and it says put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Spell Mastery. If there are 2 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, that creature enters the battlefield with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. So Fearsome Awakening saw no play in Fate Reforged. Fearsome Awakening only hit your graveyard, and it only gave the creature 1 +1/+1 counter if it was a dragon. So will this be better than Fearsome Awakening, which saw basically no play? I think it might. Because it can hit any graveyard. So if you don't have something awesome, maybe your opponent has something awesome, so it has that going for it. It's relatively decently costed for the effect, and if you do have Spell Mastery, that creature's going to be +2/+2 bigger permanently. So I'm going to be cautious with this, and I'm actually going to give it a B-. That's a fragile grade. I do tend to really like the concept of graveyard to battlefield, and it never quite seems to work out. So this is a grade that I very readily can see dropping to C+ or C or C- even. But I'm going to go optimistically with a B+ for now. All right, next up we have Night Snare. Not Nightmare, Night Snare. This is a 3 and a black sorcery at common, and it says target opponent reveals his or her hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. If you do, that player discards that card. So it's Thoughtseize. If you don't choose to discard a card, or if you don't choose a card, rather, that player discards 2 cards. So it's Mind Rot. So it's Thoughtseize or Mind Rot, and you get to choose which you want it to be after you see their hand, and it costs more than either of them. It costs 3 more than Thoughtseize, and it costs 1 more than Mind Rot. So what do I think of this card? Because Thoughtseize is okay in Limited, and Mind Rot is okay in Limited. I do love the design of this card. I do like that it's 2 different cards, and I get to kind of pick which card it is. It feels like a split card, really. So yeah, it's a Thoughtseize if you see something awesome in a hand bigger than 2. Or it's a Mind Rot if they only have 2 cards, and that's probably going to be the decision factor for me. Am I destroying their hand, or am I taking an awesome card, or the best card, simply? Because if it's a hand of 3 cards, and you Mind Rot them, they're still going to keep the best card. So I don't know that that's ever going to be the play. I don't know that there's ever going to be a situation that the right play is to say, I don't care which 2 you throw away. I think it's always the right decision to take the 1 best rather than the 2 of your opponent's choice. Obviously, if they have 2 cards, the right choice is 2 cards. That being said, would I play this at 4? I rarely play Mind Rot at 3, so I don't think I'm ever going to play this at 4, even with the possibility of being at Thoughtseize, because Thoughtseize just isn't that awesome in Limited. It's awesome in Constructed. That doesn't translate to Limited, though. So I'm going to give it a D. I think it's still sideboardable, maybe, but even then, not the best. Next up, we have Priest of the Bloodright. This is a 3 black creature human cleric at rare, and it's a 2/2. And it says, when Priest of the Bloodright enters the battlefield, put a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 2 life. So this is a 7/7 for 5 with 5 of that power in the air. I will totally pay 2 life a turn for that for a while, and I will very aggressively attack with that 2/2. I will throw that 2/2 at everything my opponent has, or if my opponent's being aggressive, I will throw that 2/2 under the bus so fast. Yeah. If they block it, you know, if I'm attacking with that 2/2, if they block it, cool, I got rid of the downside. If they don't block it, cool, I got in for 2 damage. That's nothing. We have matching clocks. I'm taking 2, but they're taking 2. I like this guy a lot, and I'll consider him to be a pretty high pick. I think he's just shy of bomb territory, just barely shy. I'm going to go with an A- on him. Total first pick, I think. Next up, we have Rabid Bloodsucker. This is a 4 and a black creature vampire at common, and it's a 3/2. It has flying, and it says when Rabid Bloodsucker enters the battlefield, each player loses 2 life. So it's a 3/2 flyer for 5. That's a little bit expensive for me. A little bit expensive. And I have to lose 2 life for playing it. My opponent loses 2 life too. Cool. It just feels too expensive for me to play. I think it's totally cuttable. I think if you really desperately need a 5-mana flyer with 3 power, then you could maybe keep it in, but I think it's more cuttable than not, so C-. Next up, we have good old Read the Bones. 2 and a black for a sorcery at common. Scry 2, then draw 2 cards, then you lose 2 life. This card's done awesome work. It's a solid card from Theros. I think it was Theros. Yeah, it had to have been Theros. Generally includable, at least as a one-of in most black decks. Grindy decks love it, and aggro decks are pretty happy with it too, just to refill their hand once they've emptied it. It's not a bomb, it's not a high pick, it's not a card that you take first pick, it's not a card that you take 4th pick, usually. You take it a little bit lower than that, but you include it almost all the time, and maybe even a couple copies if you are a bit grindy. C+ for me, solid C+. Next up, we have Reeve Soul. Reeve Soul is a 1 and a black sorcery at common that says destroy target creature with power 3 or less. Defeat in Dragons of Tarkir was totally playable, and that was this card exactly, except it said 2 power. This is just a strictly better defeat. So I'll totally play Reeve Soul. It's not premium removal. You know, it's early to mid-game removal. It doesn't hit bombs, but it clears the way for your early attacks. It clears away annoying early creatures. Solid pick, I think. I give it a solid B. Next up, we have Returned Centaur, another reprint from Theros. This is a 3 and a black creature zombie centaur at common for a 2/4. And it says when Returned Centaur enters the battlefield, target player puts the top 4 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. It's just sort of fine-ish. It's not awesome. The mill's pretty garbage because, again, I think the idea of milling yourself to get spell mastery is stupid in this format, and I don't think you're really going to be all in on Scab Goliath or anything like that. Milling your opponent doesn't really do anything. So really, this is a 2/4 for 4, which is just kind of fine. If that's what you need, if you're desperate for creatures, it's a fine enough creature, but totally cuttable for basically any other threat. So C-. Next up, we have Revenant. This is a 4 and a black creature spirit at uncommon, and it is a star. It has flying, and it says Revenant's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Flying is what makes Revenant relevant, I think, because if it gets even mid-sized, it's a decent threat. A 3/3 flyer is a pretty decent threat in comparison to a 3/3 on the ground. At 5 mana, it's also pretty unlikely that this will be a dead card in your hand. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to get to turn 5, or in a less perfect world, turn 6 or turn 7, and have nothing dead in your graveyard. You're probably going to have at least something. And so this will at least be a 1/1, maybe a 2/2, and it'll get bigger as time goes on. And of course, if you have sack outlets, you can potentially manipulate this more easily. Overall, I think it's just a decent card that I think will draw removal pretty well as well. So I think I'll give it a C+. It maybe even could be a B-. Next up, we have Shadows of the Past. This is a 1 and a black enchantment at uncommon, and it says whenever a creature dies, scry 1. As well, you can pay 4 and a black, and each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Activate this ability only if there are 4 or more creatures in your graveyard. This just seems like another one of these bad enchantments to me. The scry is nifty, but unreliable. And the life loss ability is way too expensive. 5 mana for not even Douse and Gloom because it doesn't hit creatures. 5 mana for a 2 drain life. It just feels way too expensive. And again, is unreliable because you're going to have, is it 4 or is it more than 4? 4 or more. You're going to have at least 4 creatures in your graveyard in order for this to even turn on. That's just so unreliable, and it's so expensive, and you have to put this in your deck. I don't like it at all. Solid F for me. Next up, we have Shambling Ghoul. This is a 1 and a black creature zombie at common for a 2/3, and it says Shambling Ghoul enters the battlefield tapped. So Diregraph Ghoul was from Innistrad, Dark Ascension, I think it was Innistrad, was totally playable. It was a 1-drop 2/2 zombie that entered the battlefield tapped. This is a 2/3 zombie, so slightly more tough for 1 extra mana. I think that makes this guy less playable. Not being a turn 1 play, so a 2/2 attacking on turn 2 is less playable. A 2/3 attacking on turn 3, that's significantly less exciting, but still okay. I still think this card's totally includable if you want it. I think it's just sort of middle of the line, cuttable if you want to cut it, and not cuttable if you don't. So, solid stereotypical C, I've got to say. Next up, we have Tainted Remedy. This is a 2 and a black enchantment at rare that says if an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. Hey guys, look. It's another garbage enchantment that you are not going to touch in Limited. Total Constructed card has no place in Limited. Don't ever take this, don't ever play this. The effect is just not something that's going to happen very often at all in Limited. And even when it does, it happens like once and then never again. There's no Limited decks that are all in on the life gain plan, so just not exciting for me in any way, shape, or form. Solid F. Next up, we have Thornbow Archer. This is a single black creature elf archer at common for a 1/2. And she says whenever Thornbow Archer attacks, each opponent who doesn't control an elf loses 1. So she's interesting. It seems like most games, it'll be kind of like a 2/2 for 1, except when it comes to blocking or being blocked. Because I don't think people are just always going to have elves, and especially if they're not in black and or green, they're very unlikely to have elves. So I think this is sort of like a weak filler card. It is a 1/2 for 1, which is okay. It's better than a 1/1 for 1. But it's not awesome, and I don't even think it's includable in every deck. I think it's just kind of weak filler, so C- for me. More cuttable than cuttable. Next up, we have Tormented Thoughts. This is a reprint from Journey into Nyx. 2 and a black for a sorcery at uncommon, and it says, as an additional cost to cast Tormented Thoughts, sacrifice a creature. That's a big cost. Target player discards a number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. No, do not like this. I have to sack a creature to make my opponent empty their hand. I'm gambling that I'm going to get anything good. So if they have 2 cards and I sack a 2/2, yeah, I empty their hand, but it's up to chance whether or not I get rid of 2 bombs or 2 lands. Beyond that, to get a really big value out of this, emptying their hand of 5 cards, I have to kill a 5-power creature. That's not a good trade-off. I would just rather attack them with my 5-power creature. This is a straight-up F for me. I don't ever want to play this card. I never played this card in Nyx, and I don't think I'll ever play this card here. Next up, we have Touch of Moonglove. This is a pretty card. Very beautiful art. I'd actually kind of like a print of this, to be honest. So it's a single black for a common instant that says target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. Whenever a creature dealt damage by that creature dies this turn, its controller loses 2 life. There's a lot of pronouns going on there, but that is whenever the Touch of Moonglove creature deals damage and kills a creature, the controller of that creature that died loses 2 life, just to clarify that, because I was definitely had to read that a couple of times. So Coat with Venom was pretty solid in Dragons of Tarkir. It was really solid. But a big part of that was because of the +1/+2 part of that card. Getting no toughness increase hurts here because the Death Touch kind of makes the +1/+0 redundant unless we're dealing with multiple blockers, which isn't a super common thing in Limited. The vast majority of blocks that I experience in Limited are one-on-one. It's not common to see 2 blockers, 3 blockers, whatever. So really this just sort of says kill a creature with, the expense of your own. This says trade. And they lose 2 life. It's okay. It's still fine. It's still includable if you're looking for a combat trick like this. So I do give it a C, but nothing more than that, unfortunately. Next up, we have Undead Servant. This is a 3 and a black creature zombie at common. And it says, when Undead Servant enters the battlefield, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield for each card named Undead Servant in your graveyard. And it's a 3/2, by the way. I'll have to see this one play out. It feels too clunky and overcosted for me. It's a 3/2 for 4. The first one gets you an overcosted 3/2. The second one, if the first one's dead, gets you an undercosted 5/4. But that first one did have to die. And it's really clunky. It's really inconsistent. It's not like some of the other cards in this cycle where the creature just has to be on the battlefield. This one, you have to have played the creature and had the creature die. And I don't know. I'll have to see it played out to see how powerful it is. But I'm going to go pretty cautious on this guy until I see differently and go with a C-. Next up, we have Unholy Hunger. This is a 3 black instant at common that says destroy target creature. Just blow it up. It also has Spell Mastery. If there are 2 or more instant and/or sorcery cards in your graveyard, you gain 2 life. So destroy target creature, maybe gain 2 life. This is kind of the standard removal these days, at common anyways. 3 black to kill something and do something. We had Sip of Hemlock, we had something to do with Mogus, I think? Sounds familiar anyways. But this is the typical black common kill spell these days. Totally wasn't playable 5 years ago, but totally fine today. It's removal, it's slow, it's clunky, but you need it. You need to have it. It doesn't stack too well in multiples because it is pricey. It is double black, but it's still fine. It's a C+. It's a card that you're going to put a 1 of in pretty much for sure, I think, but probably not too many more than that, and not highly pickable like removal often is. Finally, we have Weight of the Underworld. This is a 3 and a black enchantment aura at common, and it says enchanted creature gets -3, -2. Now, a quick check shows that the average toughness of creatures in this format is something like 2.7, 2.8, very nearly 3. Which means that Weight of the Underworld doesn't kill the average creature in this set. Now, of course, the average will be skewed a little bit by bombs and rares that there will not be multiples of, but this doesn't kill everything. Now, being an enchantment, being an aura, it at least significantly weakens them forever, for as long as it's on there, which is still fine. Weight of the Underworld is, of course, a reprint from, I think, Born, maybe? One of the Theros block sets. And it was fine there as well, and I think it's going to be fine here, too. Just like Unholy Hunger, it's removal or removal-ish that's not highly pickable, but is still pickable and playable. So I'll give it a C, maybe a C+, because there is some Enchantment Matters stuff going on in this set. So yeah, that's black. Black looks pretty interesting. We fell off a little bit there on black at the end. A lot of C's, a couple of F's, several F's actually at the end. But if we go back, there was some awesome stuff in this color. There's decent removal. There's some really cool rares like Erebos' Titan and Guiltleaf Winnower, and there was a series of A's where we had Corthopod and Languish and Liliana. There's a lot of stuff to like in black. Black looks like a really solid, possibly support color to me. I think you'll want a lot of the cool effects going on in black, and you'll want to pair it with the good creatures in other colors. I think that's where black's going to fall in, and I'll be pretty happy to use black in that way. But that's black. Black is done. We're going to move on to red tomorrow. So, as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at The Mana Leak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Mana Leak. You've already found me here on YouTube. You've got the comment section down below. If you like the videos, you should click those little thumbs up icons to let me know that you like the videos, let the world know that you like the videos, and keep my videos rising on through the ranks. As well, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, you should. There's a link or a button below each video and one in the outro of each video. And that'll keep you up to date on all the latest Crack-A-Pack Tuesdays, Wacky Wednesdays, Spiky Saturdays, and any other videos that pop up here or there, such as these set reviews. You want to be the first one to see these set reviews to prepare for pre-release in, if you're watching this when it comes out, a week. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you all next time.